Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Vanella, Principal of EBHS, and the Recording Secretary here at NJPSA. Well, it's now high noon, and it's time for us to turn our attention from the wonk world of educational policy to the Wild West world of politics. And there's no better person to be our guide than Dr. Ben Dworkin of the Rowan Institute of Public Policy and Citizenship. As one of New Jersey's most astute and widely quoted political analysts, he serves as a nonpartisan commentator of political developments for media in New Jersey and nationally. Don't forget, this is an election year here in New Jersey. In addition to the phenomenal work he does with students at Rowan, Dr. Dworkin has appeared on numerous network and cable news shows and is frequently quoted by all of New Jersey's major newspapers and radio stations, as well as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. A frequent speaker and friend of NJPSA, it is my pleasure to welcome and turn our attention to Dr. Ben Dworkin, who will discuss the state of the state politics here in New Jersey. Dr. Dworkin.
Thank you so much, Mike. I greatly appreciate that introduction. I have a fondness for East Brunswick because before I moved south, in order to be closer to Rowan University, that's where we lived. So greatly appreciate all of you inviting me back. It's good to be with friends, to see my dear friend Dan Higgins again. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of this. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for the tremendous leadership that all of you have shown over the past year in these very difficult times in trying to navigate really unprecedented challenges. Greatly appreciate all of you trying to do the right thing. It's not everybody appreciates it, but some of us do. So thank you very much. It has been a challenging time in American politics. And as one may do in these kinds of troubled days, I find myself often reading poetry for some calmness and inspiration. One poem has particularly stayed with me. In 1849, America was just 73 years old and heading towards a civil war. And concerned with our young nation's future, the preeminent poet of the era, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, wrote a poem called The Building of the Ship. And in it, he compares America to a great ship called Union. It's clear which side of this Civil War fight he was going to be on. And so he compares America to this great ship, and he urges all of us to sail on, O ship of state. It's a poem about recommitting ourselves to national purpose and national unity. Now, Wadsworth sets the stage for us today because any discussion about the state of New Jersey's politics must begin by acknowledging our national political situation, a situation that cries out for both national purpose and national unity. In terms of American politics today, the fact is we've been through a lot. And most importantly, the nation survived. Now, that particular outcome wasn't always clear. Our institutions and basic principles by which we engage in political debate were not nearly as strong as many of us had thought. And yet, because of the grounded decision-making of judges and secretaries of state and countless election workers across the nation, the great American experiment in representative democracy held fast. And it held to produce one of the largest and cleanest elections in American history. The number of Americans who cast ballots in this past November's election for president was over 155 million. That is a 20% increase over 2016, 20% increase in participatory democracy. Now, Donald Trump got more than 74 million votes. That is 12 million more votes than he received 4 years earlier. His campaign focused on a core constituency, white voters with no more than a high school diploma, the white working class. And millions of these people didn't vote in 2016. So the Trump campaign targeted them, appealed to them, and got them out to the polls in 2020. It should have been enough. In the history of the American Republic, only one other candidate has ever received more than 74 million votes. And unfortunately for Donald Trump, that other person was Joe Biden, who got more than 81 million votes. So the fact that so many people expressed their voice in this election and that it was done in such a clean way is something we can all be proud of, even as we acknowledge the weaknesses of the system as well. Now, moving forward, both the Democrats and the Republicans, as political parties, are facing some very real internal struggles. And importantly, for all of us here in New Jersey, these internal struggles at the national level are filtering down into our state politics. For the Democrats nationally, there is a fight between those Democrats who emphasize compromise, electability, and working through the system. On the other side are those who insist on broader, more fundamental, and more immediate changing of the system. Think Joe Biden on one side and Senator Bernie Sanders on the other side. Or to put it in more ideological terms, on one side in the Democratic Party, we have the liberals, and on the other side, we have the left. And the fight is over how they approach whether to reform the system or to completely throw out the system and start anew. So in the presidential primary, the party chose and chose decisively. A vast majority of Democrats wanted to work through the system, not end it. Just because the Democratic left of Bernie Sanders didn't win the primary doesn't mean that they all went home. Not at all. Everyone is still in the mix, and there will continue to be ongoing battles over policy that reflect this larger tension, with Biden liberals on one side and the Sanders left on the other. Now, for the Republicans, the post-election debate is over what role President Trump should play in the party's future. But even that isn't quite it. More fundamentally, this is an argument within the Republican Party over whether to focus the party on winning elections. Now, this argument seems silly, right? I mean, after all, the primary function of a political party is to win elections. That's what parties are supposed to do. But in today's GOP, the question is, does winning matter as much as standing with Donald Trump? Under Trump, the Republicans lost the House, they lost the Senate, and they lost the White House. And you have to ask yourself, how likely is that, would it be that all of that would have happened if we had President Mike Pence and not President Donald Trump? And I'd suggest to you that the answer is that it's not likely. And the more that Donald Trump remains in the center of the mix, the more likely it is for Democrats to win and Republicans to lose. When Trump is around, Democrats are unified. There is nothing easier than being an anti-Trump Democrat. And they are motivated, these Democrats. So if there's one clear political lesson from 2020, it's that Donald Trump unifies the Democratic Party like no other person. Furthermore, when Trump is around, the Republican Party opens itself up to an increasing array of conspiracy theorists as candidates. And these candidates actually can and do win Republican primaries in their district. But once they have to run in November in a general election, they put even safe Republican seats at risk of flipping Democratic. So for people like Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader in the US Senate, and his supporters, winning is all that matters. You have to get candidates that win to take back control of the Senate. And this is why McConnell keeps trying to isolate Trump, to create distance between what he sees as the future Republican Party and the former president. But to a vast number of hardcore Trump supporters, winning doesn't matter as much as standing with the former president. If you're a white working class voter in a flyover state, and you think that no matter who's in charge of Congress, you're going to get squeezed, you're never going to get the real kind of benefits that you would hope for from government, then voting isn't about winning. It's about showing your rage and resentment of the powers that be. For these people who overwhelmingly support and believe Donald Trump, voting isn't about sending someone new to Congress or to the state legislature. Voting is about sending a message. For them, voting is an act of defiance against the institutions and elites, including big media, big technology, and big government. And let me just say, the emphasis here, we are politely calling it, political scientists like me call it, working class. But again, what we're talking about are people who don't have more than a high school degree. And not everybody's going to go to college, but the divide has been huge. Now, these tensions on both sides of the aisle filter down and affect our state politics here in New Jersey. Consider the Democrats, where again, the tension involves a struggle between those who want to reform the system and those who want to throw the system out and build something new. Here in New Jersey, we've seen two examples of this fight on the Democratic side. One is the debate over the state's tax credit incentive program for large companies that either come here or promise to stay here and not move to another cheaper state. On one side, you have the Democratic liberals who are ready to reform the system, make it more open, make it less about insider access, impose certain limits on how far it can go, how much in tax credits you can actually give out. On the other side was the Democratic left, who thought the very idea of giving $1 million tax breaks to $1 million company is so unthinkable and dumb that they just want to get rid of the whole thing. This wasn't about changing a number. This was about scrapping it completely. For them, there was no reform that could save a bad idea. The whole system should be done away with. Don't reform it, just end it. Now, Democrat Governor Phil Murphy, as much as he works with and has been strongly supported by the Democratic left, has never agreed to get rid of the corporate tax incentive programs. We should remember that when push came to shove, Phil Murphy was ready to give Amazon $5 billion in tax credits if they put their East Coast headquarters in Newark. He wasn't going to give up this opportunity. So on this issue, Murphy isn't left, he's liberal. And that is why we still have a corporate tax credit program today. But it was a fight. There were some reforms, but the system is still in place. Another example of this fight between liberals and the left among Democrats is when it comes to the power we give to local political parties to influence a primary election. And this fight is at the very heart of how New Jersey politics has been operating for about 100 years. As you may know, in a primary election, New Jersey, unlike every other state in the union, New Jersey alone allows those candidates who are endorsed by the county party organization to be listed together on the ballot. So when a registered Democratic voter goes to vote in a primary election, he or she sees one column right there in the beginning, usually column A, where everybody is listed, all the endorsed candidates. And it makes it very easy for this voter to know who to vote for, especially because most of them have absolutely no clue who their county commissioners are or who their sheriff is. I mean, they just don't know. They can't name these people. They couldn't tell you anything they did. They're a Democrat. They showed up into the primary. They know the top people. They don't know these people, but everybody's listed there. So now I know who to vote for. The preferred ballot position in a primary, preferred ballot position in a primary is known as the line. And those who get the endorsement are running on the line. Those who don't get the party's endorsement, who are not favored by the party's insiders, they are running off the line. Now, to run off the line could mean that you don't end up in column A, but you're in B, C, D, E, F, G, miles away from where most primary voters are looking. And it's a rule of thumb that to be on the line in New Jersey generally gives you about a 70% chance of winning a primary, and usually greater. So how does a candidate get the line? The answer is that it's different in every county. Every county party has its own bylaws. So Union County Democrats award the line differently from Essex County Democrats, who award the line differently from Middlesex County Democrats, etc. And this is the point of contention. The Democratic left sees the line, the awarding of this preferred ballot position in a primary, as a tool of party bosses to reward their supporters and block anybody new, block anyone else from having a real chance to win the nomination. They want to get rid of it completely. Now, for the left, the awarding the line is just another example of an utterly corrupt system. For the liberals in the Democratic Party, the line is indeed a tool that rewards those who can win. And that's a good thing. It rewards those who stay involved and don't just show up one day and say, I am here to reform the party. You got to let me get the nomination and give me preferred ballot position. From this perspective, Democratic liberals see it as a way to prevent extremist candidates from taking over. I mean, just consider a Marjorie Taylor Greene character, right? Somebody on the extreme part. If the Republican Party here had this, I mean, I'm talking Democrats, but I'm just using it as an example, you could isolate that person because you have the line. If you get rid of the line, as is being advocated, you don't nearly have that chance. And so there is, for Democratic liberals, they see this as not the worst thing in the world here. But even the liberals understand that a legitimate candidate can get hurt when he or she is placed down in column J or K, which for these off-the-line candidates is the equivalent of exiling them to ballot Siberia. And so while the Democratic liberals want to keep the system of awarding a line, there may be some willingness to reform how it works by standardizing placement rules and that thereby rein in some of the most egregious ballot designs in a primary. Right now, both sides are in federal court debating this issue. If the left wins, if the left convinces the United States federal court system that the whole system is corrupt, that it violates the civil rights of people who are trying to run in a primary, it would be a tsunami in New Jersey politics, a complete game changer that would upend the political power structure of the last 100 years. And what I'm suggesting to you today is that this debate, like the debate over corporate tax credits, is part of the more fundamental struggle that the National Party is having between those who are ready to reform and those who want to throw out the system. Now, the Republicans in New Jersey, as I mentioned, they are having their own internal struggle over whether to support Trump or whether support for Trump is worth the higher chance that you will lose more elections. In New Jersey, the state Republicans were ready to have this fight. For people who watch this stuff for a living, this was exciting because we were going to watch it all play out 1 year after the presidential election. Former state assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli was running to be the Republican nominee for governor. And in the past, he had said some pretty harsh words about Donald Trump, particularly in the 2016, 2017 time period. Over the past year, he softened up a bit and said a bunch of nice things too. But at least he was on the record there. Running against Ciattarelli was Doug Steinhardt, the state Republican Party chairman, and someone who wrapped himself up completely in the MAGA flag, not only praising Trump, but blasting anyone who didn't, and even more importantly, anybody who dared to criticize Trump. Steinhardt, the pro-Trump candidate, was probably going to win the state Republican primary because among GOP voters in New Jersey, Trump remains very, very popular. But it was just as likely that Steinhardt, if he got the nomination, was going to lose in November and lose big. Because the fact is, New Jersey isn't Alabama, it's New Jersey. And so when you have someone lose big at the top of the ticket, it would be hurt everybody, every other Republican running down ballot. Negative ripple effects for every other Republican running this November. So once you get past the Republican primary voters in New Jersey, support for Donald Trump falls off a cliff. The question was whether Republicans would care about November, or whether support for Trump, vote for the more Trump candidate, was more important than worrying about electoral implications in November. And so thus the stage was set between a Republican Trumpist candidate, Steinhardt, who could win the primary and lose the election, and the more traditional Republican candidate, Jack Ciattarelli, who would still probably lose in November, but wouldn't get slaughtered, and therefore give other Republicans running in November a fighting chance. Well, as they say, timing is everything. Doug Steinhardt put out his official announcement that I am running for governor on January 4th. 2 days later, we watched in horror as the US Capitol was laid siege by thousands of hardcore Trump supporters. And at that moment, at least in New Jersey, Trump was a pariah. He wasn't being blamed. This wasn't about blaming him for offensive language or policy disagreements. This was an attempted coup that left 5 people dead, including a police officer. Overnight, Doug Steinhardt's support vanished. Everybody ran away except for a handful of folks. Poof. He withdrew before the end of the week. And that's why Jack Ciattarelli is going to be the Republican nominee for governor. Thus, the national Republican debate over winning and Donald Trump's role in the party filtered down into New Jersey, but historical events mean that we're not going to have the chance to really see who wins this internal GOP fight. Now, the fight's still looming, and Donald Trump might be off Twitter, but no one should think that he will be silent forever. He is the guest that wouldn't leave. And right now, he stepped away from the table, but we've seen every indication that he is going to come back. Unless, of course, he gets indicted in New York, which is a whole other story. Leave that aside. Now, I focused on Murphy and Ciattarelli because these are the 2 major party candidates running for governor this year. And in New Jersey, the race for governor is everything. More important than the race for president for most political people. The governor is the center of the political universe in the state. Constitutionally, our governor is the most powerful governor in the entire country. No state constitution in the country makes its governor more powerful than we do in New Jersey. So Governor Phil Murphy is running for re-election, and he faces 2 significant historical trends that are not in his favor. First, no Democrat has won re-election to governor since 1977. In that span, 3 Republican governors have been able to win a second term: Tom Kean, Christine Todd Whitman, and Chris Christie. The second historical trend that Murphy is going to have to overcome is that for 3 decades, the gubernatorial candidate who wins is of the opposite party of the presidential winner the year before. So to explain what that means, 1988, Republican George H.W. Bush wins the presidency. The next year, 1989, Democrat Jim Florio wins. 4 years later, 1992, Democrat Bill Clinton wins the White House, and in 1993, New Jersey elects Republican Christine Todd Whitman as governor. And on and on and on it goes every 4 years, including Trump's win in 2016, followed by Democrat Phil Murphy's win in 2017. So the Biden victory, which you would think actually will probably help Republican Jack Ciattarelli and help him win. Plus, Murphy, a Democrat, is running for re-election, which is something Democrats have not been able to do. So that should help Republicans as well. I would want to suggest to you that this is the year that history is going to change. The fact is, Phil Murphy is poised to win re-election, solid, not overwhelming, but solid re-election this November. And again, as you have seen over the past year, whomever is governor has a massive influence on everything we do in New Jersey. This election for governor really matters to all of us. The governor affects education, taxes, the economy, healthcare, justice, the environment, everything. because the framers of the state constitution wanted it that way. So why is Governor Phil Murphy in such good shape to win re-election? 4 reasons, and I'll just go through them quickly. First, the pandemic response. In a crisis like this, there are a few things that you have to do if you're the leader. Be accessible, be direct and honest, provide reliable information. On all of these areas, Murphy has won high marks from the public. Now, just a year ago, 1 out of every 5 New Jerseyans had no clue who Phil Murphy was. Every poll said the guy had been elected for 2 years. Most people could say, yeah, I think I know his name. Couldn't tell you anything he did. That's not true anymore. Consistency, being in front of the cameras, this has made Phil Murphy a household name. Sure, there is grumbling. Small businesses through this pandemic have suffered greatly. Obviously, as you know, everyone involved with the education system, from parents to professionals, everybody has been affected and has opinions on how the state has done a good or not so good job here. People are struggling. But polling is telling us that the New Jersey citizens are not blaming Murphy, not in any real way. And now things are beginning to look up as we begin to come out of this terrible crisis. A second reason why Murphy is in good shape for re-election is that he has locked down his progressive base with a very solid progressive record. And Murphy can rightfully claim credit for some significant and popular legislative accomplishments. And we're talking about the millionaire's tax. 67% of the New Jerseyans like it. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Over 70% of New Jerseyans approve. Free community college, social justice initiatives, funding Planned Parenthood, dealing with climate change on multiple fronts. That's not even the whole list, but you get the idea. And so Murphy has locked down the left, which is by far the most vibrant part of the Democratic coalition. And at the same time, he has played his politics well. And he's made enough deals with party leaders to ensure that he's got no primary, and that when it comes to his reelection, everybody understands, even the Democrats who don't like him, we're all on the ticket together and we will be unified. And this gets me to the third reason Murphy is such a heavy favorite at this point to win re-election. New Jersey is blue and getting bluer. Over the last 14 years, the registration advantage that Democrats had over Republicans in this state has gone from a little under 300,000 to over 1 million. That is, 14 years ago, there were more registered Democrats than registered Republicans, 290,000 more. Now, lots of these people voted for Republicans in the end. Obviously, Republicans win. But that was the margin. Today, that margin between registered Democrats and registered Republicans is over 1 million. In our highly partisan time, when your party label takes on so much significance, this kind of advantage is huge. And finally, a fourth reason why Murphy is favored is because of the economy. The more we vaccinate, the more we open up. The more we open up, the more jobs and economic activity is going to be created. So if New Jersey is largely vaccinated by midsummer, then the economy comes back towards the end of the summer and in the beginning of the fall, just in time for Murphy to claim the credit. He's the guy. Look, if the economy implodes, he'll take the blame, even if it's not his fault. But if it starts growing, he's absolutely going to get the credit. Everyone is going to less worry about, I didn't like the decision he made about my business 6 months ago. They're just happy that people are showing up at their restaurant, that the malls are open, that they've got jobs. And that is going to be a huge benefit for Phil Murphy heading into the fall election season. Now, certainly, things could change in this equation. New variants of COVID could overwhelm whatever success the current vaccination efforts have. The nursing home debacle could emerge as a top issue for voters. And lest we forget, Murphy is a Democrat, and the Democratic Party is still, especially in New Jersey, the kind of place that designs a firing squad by putting people in a circle. Or as Will Rogers famously said, I belong to no organized party, I am a Democrat. All that could happen, but for now, the reasons to assume a solid Murphy victory far outweigh the reasons to assume a Murphy loss. Now, I do want to mention that the state legislature is also up for re-election this November. All 40 seats in the state Senate and all 80 seats in the state assembly are up. The Democrats currently hold strong majorities in each, and we expect that to stay the same for all the reasons why Murphy is likely to win re-election. The Democrats in the legislature have one more thing going for them. The current legislative district lines, which favor the Democrats, are going to stay in place for another 2 years. It wasn't supposed to be this way. We were supposed to have new lines now. Republicans had been hoping that a new district map, which would have normally followed the completion of the US Census, would favor them instead. We're going to redraw the lines to account for population shifts. And then because we have to make sure all 40 districts have basically the same number of people. And this can be done. There's a process. The Republicans were hoping we'll get a better map. It'll favor our candidates more. Unfortunately for the Republicans, the Trump administration wanted to change who was counted in the US Census and therefore found itself mired in lawsuits, all of which they lost. But the litigation delays meant that the counting process was months behind. So US Census numbers, which should have shown up in New Jersey so that we could begin a redistricting process, figure out new districts, allow our June primaries and move forward, they were supposed to show up in February, as they have in every previous decade. We don't expect to get these until May, June, July, somewhere around there. And therefore, by constitutional amendment, the voters approved in November a delay. In effect, every 10 years, we're supposed to create new districts, and this time, we're taking 12 years. So the map that currently favors the Democrats is going to continue to favor the Democrats. It's just one more thing they have going for them. And that's why we fully expect to see the Democrats retain control of their strong majorities in both the state assembly and the state Senate. So what I tried to do today, just to sum this up, was to outline a few things for your consideration. Nationally, the 2020 election was certainly challenging, but in the end, a great triumph for democracy and citizen participation. In the aftermath of 2020, each political party faces its own internal tensions. For the Democrats, the tension that you have to look for is like, what's the theme here that you keep seeing these fights or read about in the paper or watch on the news? The tension is between the liberals who want reform but want to work within the system to get it, and the left who sees the system itself. The people who are talking about we need systemic change, they see the system itself as the problem and therefore something that must be torn down and rebuilt. For the Republicans, the tension is between the hardcore Trump supporters who see the former president's magnetism as the best hope for the future of the party, and those who are most concerned with winning elections in 2022 and 2024, something that they believe will require significant distancing of the party from the ex-president. And I've talked to you about how each of these tensions filters down into New Jersey and therefore affects the state of state politics. This year's gubernatorial election is critical to all of us because the New Jersey governor is more powerful than any other governor in the nation. Elections will definitely have consequences when we elect a governor. And finally, as I explained, or I tried to explain how, despite historical trends to the contrary, Phil Murphy, as of this moment, heading towards victory in November, and his fellow Democrats in the state legislature are very likely to maintain their majorities in both houses. Now, over the last few years, there's been a lot to process when you think about politics. And more than a few of us have found it exhausting, which is probably why everybody's binging on The Office or some show like that. But America's greatness stems from the role that each of us, as citizens, plays in bringing American democracy to life. And so tired as we may be, we can take heed in the immortal words of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and simply sail on, O ship of state. Thanks, and I'd be happy to take any questions.